Hey guys, welcome to Ed Puzzle number 6, I think it is, on the Roman Empire. So where we left off, we were talking about the second triumvirate, and we said that that fell apart very similar to the first one did, with one person dying, and then there was a fight between Antony and Octavian, and we said that Octavian was the leader that came out ahead, and when he took over, he changed the Roman Republic into the Roman Empire, making himself the first emperor, and he changed his name to Caesar Augustus. So now he is known as Caesar Augustus. Okay, we said that Caesar Augustus, as the first empire in Rome, he set out to really make all the people in his empire happy. So that's really the goal of his leadership. So he was going to start doing things to make the empire very strong. Okay, so he set out to make a professional army. We said he created the Praetorian Guards. He protected the seas and so forth. And he was able to control this very large area of land that we're looking at in this map. Okay, as Augustus ruled, okay, his big item was to show how powerful Rome was. So he's going to set out to make everything beautiful. Because the more beautiful the city is, the more powerful that they seem. So they did very large public buildings. They did a lot of the Greek architecture, but they added a lot of the frilly things like on the columns. They rebuilt palaces. One of his famous quotes was, "I found Rome a city of brick and I left it a city of marble," meaning that he made Rome just look beautiful to show the power that they had. In the government, he also made reforms. Now, since he owns such a large area of land, he's going to take the same concept that they did in Persia. Okay, one person can't rule all of this area efficiently, so he created a role in the government called a proconsul. Proconsuls were just the Roman word for governors. So like in the United States, we have 50 states, we have one president, one vice president, and then we have 50 governors that help rule the local areas. So the proconsuls controlled their own states, their own provinces in this area. Okay, Augustus often had those proconsuls come in so he could check with them, very similar to how the governors meet, just to make sure everything runs efficiently and that they're doing a good job. Okay, so Augustus looked at some of the problems that Rome had, and those are the changes that he's going to make. So one of the big changes that he made at this time was the tax system. Okay, the tax system, all people who were considered citizens had to pay taxes to the government, just like we do in our country today. Okay, before he changed the tax system, the tax collectors were able to keep some of that money. That was their wage. Okay, the problem was that some of those tax collectors weren't really fair. So they might go to a house and charge, 500 drachmae, okay, and then they would keep 250 drachmae for themselves when they were only supposed to charge the family 250 drachmae in the first place. So there was a little bit of shiftiness here, a little bit of untruthfulness. So Augustus is going to say, well, this probably isn't the best system. Okay, so why not make those tax collectors government officials, and then they were paid a wage. Okay, so they were unable to keep some of the money that they took from the people. Okay, changes in the legal system, since they own such a large area of land, he made a code of laws that apply to all people equally. Again, very similar to what they had initially in Rome when they created the 12 tables, and then they created those different things that we adopted, that the laws apply to everybody equally, you're innocent until proven guilty, and so forth. He did allow non-citizens to eventually become citizens, and they didn't have to pay their way to make it or own land to do so. He thought that if people were given this opportunity, they would become more loyal to the empire, which they did. Okay, so things are going really good for Augustus, and even at the end, when most people were considered happy and things were going great in the empire, they were at their peak, he still believed that he wasn't doing just enough. Okay, so he was unhappy, or he felt that people still might be unhappy with his leadership, so he decided to offer people even free food. So he started to import grain from Africa, trying to distribute this to the poor. So he's trying to make everybody citizens, he's trying to provide everybody with a job, but he still realized that there was a good chunk of people that were very poor, and he still thought well, maybe we can just feed them too. Okay, so he's trying to create this happy society in a way that was working. Okay, so the Roman Empire was at its peak under Augustus's rule because he was an efficient emperor. Okay, the problem was that eventually, after ruling, for 40 years, Augustus is going to pass away. And this is usually when problems start, because once you have a great leader, well, who's going to take their place? And that's where the Roman Empire is going to run into some problems. Okay, now in an empire, it runs very similar to a monarchy. So when Augustus dies, they're going to pass it on to a family member. So his adopted son Tiberius becomes the leader. Okay, and after Tiberius dies, then again it's going to keep going to these family members. So we're going to hit an area with lots of names. Now remember, we're not going to test you on all these names because really you're not going to remember all of these people, but it's good to talk about at least. Okay, so there was a group of emperors called the Julio-Claudian emperors, which were made up of 3 family members, all ruling successfully. Okay, so Caligula ruled first, followed by Claudius, followed by Nero. Okay, so if we look at these emperors, okay, none of them are going to be the same as Augustus. Okay, Tiberius and Claudius were effective. They weren't great. Okay, they remained the status quo, so nothing really changed under their rule. Okay, the problem was they're going to hit a period of bad emperors. Okay, Caligula and Nero, they were quite cruel, very selfish, just as a couple examples. Okay, Caligula murdered a lot of people. He spent a ton of money. He made his horse one of the consuls as one of his main advisors. So if we can think of that, why would a horse be one of the main advisors to the emperor? Okay, Nero was also quite cruel. Some of the things that he did, again, he killed a lot of people, but he also killed his mother and 2 of his wives. Okay, so these were just a period of turmoil in the Roman Empire. After Nero dies, again, conflict is going to break out to figure out who's the next leader. In 69 AD, a guy named Vespasian becomes emperor. We'll probably test you on him, not necessarily his name, but for what he built. Okay, so Vespasian was able to restore order, okay, but he was pretty harsh to those that weren't necessarily for the Roman Empire. Okay, he crushed a lot of uprisings, some of the Jewish revolts, during this time. The big thing that he's known for is that he was the one emperor who decided to build the Colosseum. So the Colosseum, we know for Rome today, it's still there. You can go and visit it. It's that huge amphitheater in Rome where they held a lot of those gladiator fights. Okay, so he is given credit to the construction of that. Okay, after Vespasian dies, his sons then take over. Again, these names you don't all have to remember. One of his sons, Titus, when he was the leader, this is the time frame when Mount Vesuvius erupted and destroyed Pompeii. Okay, a lot of students know about Pompeii and what happened there. And we'll talk about that a little bit in some of the activities that we do in class. Okay, so even though we have some turmoil in the leadership, Rome is still growing. It's still quite prosperous. They had good trade. There wasn't a lot of war going on with outside nations and so on. Okay, then we hit a time period where we actually hit 5 good emperors right in a row, and we call these the 5 good emperors. Okay, really creative name there. Okay, these were all emperors that were not related to Vespasian or to Augustus. Okay, but they're Nerva, Trajan, Hadrian, Antonius, Pius, Marcus Aurelius. These men did a really good job. Not as great as Augustus, but they kept Rome thriving. So during this time, they had a lot of economic growth. They had a lot of trade with other nations. Agriculture was flourishing, and they really took some time to do some good things for the people. So down below that we can see just a few of the things that they did. They made money available so all kids could receive an education. Okay, that was a big deal at this time because remember, usually the wealthy are the only ones that have an education. So this time even poor kids were allowed the ability to go to school, learn how to read, learn a trade, and so on. Hadrian made it that the laws were easier to understand. We would probably say that they were written in layman's terms. Okay, so the average person knew exactly what was going on. During this time, they built a lot of roads, monuments, bridges. They built arches. They learned how to work with concrete pretty well. They also built something called aqueducts, which we'll talk about a little bit later, but this was a huge Roman innovation where they were able to bring water from the countryside into the city. So these were really big things that they were able to improve upon. So if we look at Rome, Rome is going to hit its peak size under Emperor Trajan. So this is right at the end. So it's its maximum size. It's the biggest that it's ever been. Okay, his successors, after he dies, believes that the empire is just too big to control. So they're going to get to that point where how do you rule so many people efficiently, effectively, and prevent any rebellion from happening? Okay, so in his successors, they're going to look at their borders and they're going to say, well, we can't really defend this area. Maybe we should pull back a little bit. And they're going to take those troops and put them in areas that were easy to protect. So again, if we look at their empire, they're there, but now they're going to have holes in certain areas, areas that are unprotected. And we know that other areas who are getting larger at this time are going to say, whoop, there's a little opportunity that we can kind of come in and invade because they're not protecting those borders. So that's going to come eventually. Okay, so in the 100s, so we actually hit modern day, I guess you can say, Rome is going to be one of the largest empires in history. Okay, it's big, it's efficient, they're doing its best. Okay, if we look at the people that lived in this empire, we have a lot of different people from across Europe. We're in Northern Africa, we're in parts of Asia, okay, and yet they're all united by culture, by law, by their government. Okay, so it was really a remarkable item to have an empire of this size. Every free person, okay, so if they're not a prisoner of war and they're not a slave, they were all citizens. So when the land idea went away, okay, and everybody was treated equally. Again, this just leads to like peace, okay? People didn't feel slighted by the government. They didn't feel jealous towards, money and so forth. If we look at Rome, and we look a little bit at their way of life and some of the things that they did, okay, their economy was thriving, okay, they did use agriculture to their fullest effect. So with agriculture across the lands of Europe, Northern Africa, and Greece and parts of Asia, they were able to have a lot of products that they could trade efficiently. In Rome, even though they were so big, they decided to use the same currency across all areas, so it made that trade very easy across their empire. They used standard weights and measurement. Okay, that became a new concept. They're going to develop this idea called numerals. So if we think about the Roman numeral system, it was Rome that kind of came up with that. The roads were a big idea. Roads were the reason that they were able to trade across the land with their soldiers. They were able to communicate effectively, move easily. Okay, so these are all good things. The Roman Navy was very strong, protected those Mediterranean seas so there weren't any pirate raids and so forth. So all of these things equaled a very powerful and wealthy government. So during the peak of Rome, they're going to be doing really well. Okay, most of those working class citizens, though, were not part of that patrician class, okay? They're working. They're usually kind of poor. They have high taxes. They have loans to pay, and again, if they can't pay those loans and things like that, they're going to become enslaved. And let me see. I think we're going to stop here. We'll do the way of life, looking at where people lived, this idea of women and men and rights and so forth. So we'll do that in the next video because it will make more sense.